Rich car dealer mocks a desperate father, until Morgan Freeman arrives with a lesson he will never forget. Sir, we do not carry used cars here. You are in the wrong place. Mitchell Luxury Motors' pristine showroom floor echoed the sharp, sarcastic, condescending voice that permeated it. Every head looked at different directions. Under the neon-lit exhibit stands and sparkling chandeliers, Daniel Carter, a single parent, a diligent man, most importantly, a man who did not deserve this kind of humiliation, stands. Have you ever witnessed someone treated disrespectfully simply because of their relative poverty? If respect is for everyone, then comment 1. If wealth equals value, then comment 0. Travis Mitchell, the sales manager of the dealership, sat across from him, sporting a fancy suit and a smug smile. A man who assessed value more in the thickness of a customer's pocketbook than in their moral character. Daniel's jaw closed, but before he could answer, a little voice emerged next to him. "Daddy, this one really is my favorite." Oliver, his 10-year-old son, pointed wildly at a sleek silver automobile, his eyes full of naive amazement, unaware of the quiet conflict developing between the grown-ups. Travers laughed and shook his head. "That's a great option, kid, but let's be honest, your dad can't afford it." The showroom echoed with gasps. Daniel felt his stomach plummet and shame searing on his face. But before he could walk out, before he could sacrifice his pride for the benefit of his son, a quiet, methodical voice sliced across the room like a knife. "Now, that's an interesting way to handle a customer." The aura changed right away. Travis stopped, his smile gone as the whole showroom turned to follow the voice. And there came Morgan Freeman, moving forward with the kind of presence that demanded attention without asking for it. Does respect have any definition in riches? Comment 1 for no, 0 for yes. Daniel had not expected to be here today, but today was at last the day, after years of struggle, of every cent saved, of working additional shifts simply to support his son. The day he could show Oliver that hard work paid off, the day he could enter a venue like this and not feel like an outcast, the day he could purchase a car that wouldn't break down every other week. But today? Now Daniel questioned whether he had made a mistake as he stood before a man who seemed to treat him as a joke. The car dealership was a shrine of luxury, walls lined with framed pictures of wealthy consumers shaking hands with salesmen in tailored clothes, champagne flutes on glass counters, and vehicles so pristine you could see your reflection in them. Daniel did not fit in here. At least that is what Travis Mitchell wanted him to believe. "Listen," Travis said, rolling his eyes with great sigh. "I don't mean to waste your time, but maybe you would find better luck at one of those bargain dealerships down the street." Low and subdued, but loud enough laughter permeated the showroom. Daniel closed his hands into fists. Oliver, still clutching his father's hand, raised perplexed and worried questions. "Dad?" he asked in a whisper. "Can we still obtain a car?" Daniel's throat closed. He could put the humiliation under control. "But this is what I mean." His son was here seeing this. A familiar voice chilled the air before he could turn around and go. "I don't know, Mr. Mitchell," Morgan Freeman remarked, approaching closely. "Seems like this man has earned the right to be here, and in that instant as well." The game was different all around. Mitchell Luxury Motors' showroom was a temple to excess and wealth. From the immaculate high-end sports automobiles shown under sophisticated chandeliers to the shining marble flooring, everything screamed status, power, and uniqueness. While elegant salespeople muttered amounts in the hundreds of thousands, concluding agreements with the easy elegance of individuals who never had to check their bank accounts, customers in designer suits sipped complimentary cappuccino. And then Daniel Carter came around, a lone man raising a child. To save every dollar he could, a man who had worked double shifts, missed meals, and walked miles. Today was meant to be a turning point. The day he bought a dependable automobile to drive his son to school, to go to work on time, to stop fretting every time his old, battered car produced an odd sound. But he felt something crawling up his spine as he walked into the gleaming, frigid showroom floor. His tired boots looked absolutely out of place among the glossy loafers and high heels. That sentiment. He had grown somewhat accustomed to one, the one advising him he didn't belong. "Hey, Dad, look at that one." Running forward, Daniel's 10-year-old son, Oliver Carter, pointed to a sleek silver vehicle beneath the showroom lights, his eyes wide with delight, his breath misting the immaculate paint as he appreciated the leather seats and polished dashboard, his little fingers brushed against the cool glass. For him, this represented a dream rather than only a vehicle. Daniel grinned, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. Trying to hide the doubt in his voice, he said, "That's a nice one, buddy." His stomach dropped at the price sticker, which was teasing him from the windscreen. Still, he had saved, scheduled, budgeted every dollar. And now, he was at last prepared today to offer his son something better. At least that is what he believed. One other person had seen them from across the showroom floor, and he hardly seemed as excited. Travis Mitchell was seated behind a mahogany sales desk drinking an expensive cappuccino. The man's job consisted in selling pricey vehicles to overpaid consumers, a business based on handshakes with millionaires and subdued gestures toward celebrities. He was naturally good at identifying the right clients, and he knew one thing for sure as he observed Daniel and his son loving a car they obviously could not afford. His kind of clients was different. He straightened his fancy tie and approached them with a patronizing grace. "Can I assist you?" Though his speech was silky, it was clearly bored. Daniel nodded politely as he turned. "Yes," he responded. "I'm looking for something reliable, safe, something I can depend on." Travis cocked an eyebrow, his eyes languidly sweeping over Daniel's scuffed boots, his tattered pants, the weary creases on his face. Then he gave a very faint smile. "I see," he answered, gesturing vaguely toward the showroom. "Well, sir, is that within your budget? Our cars start at $65,000. Daniel tightened his throat and tensed. He had expected the cost to be somewhat high. Still, he hadn't anticipated the contempt. Keeping his voice steady, he continued, "I have a trade-in, and I've saved for a while." Travis shook his head and laughed. "That's admirable," he said, clearly intending the opposite from what he said. "But our customers normally finance or pay up front." "What kind of trade-in are we talking about?" Daniel started to swallow forcefully. He understood his ancient, run-down car was not very valuable, but all he possessed was that. "It's a 2006 Honda," he said, struggling to hang on to whatever dignity he still has. Travis's mouth opened to expand a smile. Sensing the mounting tension, many other salesmen in the showroom peered over. "A 2006 Honda?" Travis asked, as though the very words were objectionable. "Sir, I doubt this dealership is the best one for you." Daniel closed his hands into fists at his sides. "Dad?" Oliver spoke in a tiny, unsure voice. Daniel stared down at his son, staring wide-eyed and perplexedly at the trade. And yet that wounded more than anything else. Since this went beyond simply an automobile these days, this related to his son witnessing him treated like he was nothing. And yet that was not acceptable. You know, that's an interesting approach to treat a possible customer. Hearing the voice did not depend on its loudness. It was quiet, deliberate, and exuded the kind of power that would have made everyone in a room notice. Travis stood still. Daniel turned to look at me. And standing just a few steps away, Morgan Freeman observed the whole conversation with a subdued intensity. The chamber stilled itself. A few workers murmured among themselves, staring wide-eyed. Even Travis, who had been the most self-assured man in the room minutes previously, suddenly appeared like a deer caught in headlights. Morgan moved slowly and deliberately ahead. He remained calm. He wasn't hostile, but his presence alone gave the air weight, thickness, inconceivable ignorability. "I've seen a lot of salesmen in my lifetime," Morgan said, staring toward the silver automobile that had set off this whole event. "Some are honest, some are snakes." He fixed his eye on Travis's. "Tell me, Mr. Mitchell, which one you find most interesting?" Trying to calm things down, Travis cleared his throat. "Mr. Freeman, I was just stating that our dealership specializes in luxury cars." Morgan slanted his head slightly to think about the words. Then ever so gently he inquired, And does high-end mean only selling to people you personally approve of? The strain in the room grew intolerable. Consumers, staff members, even other salesmen stood awaiting what would come next. Travis came back empty-handed. He was not the most forceful man in the room, first of all. Morgan Freeman was like. Travis felt he had the upper hand. He reasoned he could choose someone deserving of respect. But what none in that room could have foreseen, that Morgan Freeman was going to impart a lesson he would never remember. Mitchell Luxury Motors now had different air quality. Just seconds before, the laughter that had swept through the showroom had stopped and replaced a heavy, stifling silence. The arrogant, overconfident manager of the dealership, Travis Mitchell, now froze, his haughty manner failing beneath the quiet yet potent presence of Morgan Freeman. Just minutes ago, Daniel Carter, who had been denigrated in front of his kid, now found himself standing next to a guy whose very voice demanded respect in a way money could never do. Oliver, his 10-year-old son, who had formerly excitedly gazed at the glittering automobiles, now tightly held his father's hand as he sensed the unsaid tension engulfing the room. Still, this was only getting started. Not by a long shot. Morgan Freeman moved slowly forward, his eyes fixed on Travis, never changing. "You know," he remarked, his voice calm, unwavering, "I've seen a lot of men like you in my lifetime." Travis blinked, trying to calm himself, and laughed stiffly. "Mr. Freeman," he answered, trying a confident look, "I assure you this is just business. We have a certain clientele here and—" Morgan raised a hand to silence him without calling attention to it. Morgan finished for him. "And you think this man doesn't belong?" Travis paused, his jaw tensed, eyes darting toward the gathering throng of consumers, staff members, other salesmen, all keenly observing. Right now, he had to exercise caution. Travis said, "I never said that," changing his tie. "To be honest, though, he is looking at vehicles that fall somewhat outside his budget." Morgan laughed quietly, but there was no entertainment value about it. "Out of his range," he repeated. He turned to Daniel, studied him momentarily, then spoke once more. "Let me ask you something, sir," he asked Daniel straightforwardly. "Why are you here today?" After spending some time chewing his tongue and swallowing his pride, Daniel at last found his voice. He said simply, "I'm here to buy a car." Morgan nodded and motioned toward the cars all around them. "And do you have the money to buy one?" he questioned, his voice real, inquiring rather than accusing. Daniel pulled his shoulders straight. "Yes, I do," he responded with great conviction. "I've been saving for years. My son and I just need something dependable, not anything fancy." Oliver squeezed his hand and gazed proudly up at his father. Morgan turned back to show Travis. "You hear that?" he questioned. "You looked at this man, at his clothes, his worn-out shoes, and decided he wasn't worth your time. He has worked, sacrificed, saved." Travis let out a harsh swallow. "That is not—" "Exactly what you did," Morgan interrupted. "And worst, you did it in front of his son." The room rippled with a murmur. Though this time it was not from humiliation, Daniel felt his chest constrict. It was for the first time someone was defending him. Travis took a breath, his confidence faltering. "Look, I does not mean any damage," he said rapidly. "I was basically trying to help him find something more realistic." Morgan squinted. "Realistic?" he asked again. He let the word float about Travis's chest, allowing its weight to rest there. "Tell me, Mr. Mitchell," Morgan said, "do you treat every customer this way, or just the ones who not walk in wearing a Rolex?" Travis did not reply, given both of their knowledge of the truth. Morgan moved still another step forward, his voice slightly lowered. "A real businessman listens. He respects. He serves. He does not judge a customer based on his shoes." He fixed his gaze on Travis's. "Tell me, Mr. Mitchell," he urged, "are you a real businessman?" Though Travis's mouth opened and closed, nothing came out. Right now, he felt the weight of every eye in the room on him. Not the one under control anymore was him. Morgan Freeman was like this, and one could not flee it either. Oliver, who had remained quiet most of the conversation, piped up out of unexpected silence. "Mr. Freeman?" he inquired, his boyish voice apprehensive yet curiously eager. Morgan looked at the lad, his face softening right away. "Yes, son," he said gently. Oliver looked at Morgan and his father alternately. "Why do some people think we belong nowhere?" The room got even more quiet. Daniel could feel his heart tighten. He never wanted Oliver to feel that he was less than. That exactly. Morgan bent slightly to meet Oliver at eye level. "Because some people," he added, "forget that the strength in a person's heart defines their value rather than the money in their pocket." Oliver's eyes grew somewhat as he listened. "Your dad?" Morgan said, staring up at Daniel and flashing a little smile. "He's stronger than most men in this room because he didn't give up. Because he walked in here knowing people like Mr. Mitchell might try to tear him down." He gave Oliver a patted shoulder. "And that is the sort of strength that counts." A wave of whispers permeated the showroom. Nods of agreement passed among several of the staff. Even Sophia, the young receptionist, grinned faintly as if glad someone had at last expressed what she had been thinking all along. Travis let out a sharp exhale, obviously aware he was losing situational control. "All right," he mumbled. "Maybe I was mistaken." Morgan nodded once, then stood back. He asked, "Maybe?" Lifting an eyebrow. Travis thought twice. Then grudgingly he turned to Daniel. I apologize," he murmured, albeit with a rigid voice. "I ought not to have assumed anything." Daniel gave him a moment of study. Then he nodded once, more gracefully than Travis had ever demonstrated. "I value that," he stated simply. Morgan gave Daniel's shoulder a quick slap. "Now let's find you a car," he remarked, smiling. Oliver radiated. "Furthermore, Travis," he wasn't closing the sale for the first time in his career. Morgan Freeman was exactly. Travis Mitchell had spent his career thinking of success as mostly measured by money. Tonight, though? Tonight he discovered that real success is about treating people rather than about what you own. And due to Morgan Freeman, he would never forget it. Never this quiet in a Mitchell Luxury Motors dealership. Only moments earlier, it was full with laughter, arrogance, and whispered judgments. Now, however, as Morgan Freeman's voice pierced through the air like a judge giving a final verdict, all of that had changed. Once so secure of his position at the top of this so-called hierarchy, Travis Mitchell now stood anchored to the floor, uncertain for the first time in years. But the event transcended him as well. It was about Daniel Carter, the father who had come in looking just for a means to support his son, a dad who had been denigrated in front of that very little child. Right now? It was time now for the tables to rotate. Travis's jaw tensed as Morgan Freeman advanced another step forward, his face unreadable. "Seems to me," Morgan said, his voice strong, deliberate, "that you've got an interesting way of deciding who deserves respect in this place." A couple of clients moved uneasily. The receptionist, Sophia, looked at Travis, then back at Morgan, her fingers twitching as she waited for his answer. But Travis had none for the first time as well. Rather, he laughed forcedly and ran a hand down the front of his immaculate suit, his confidence faltering. "Mr. Freeman," he replied, "I think you've misunderstood." Morgan stopped him midway through a sentence with a hand. "Oh, I understood perfectly," he responded naturally. "I understood that you looked at this man and judged him the second he walked through those doors. I understood that you assumed his worth based on his clothes, his bank account, maybe even his manner of carrying himself." Turning slightly, Morgan pointed toward Daniel and his son. "But what you missed," he said, "is that this man right here is worth more than every single car in this building taken together." The space plunged into shocked quiet. Customers glancing at one another, some nodding silently in agreement, a steady murmur rippled throughout the showroom. Once too terrified to talk, Sophia also stood a little taller now. Travis crossed his arms. His face was paler than it had been. Seeking control, he replied, "With all due respect, Mr. Freeman, this is a business. We have a certain clientele. We cannot waste time on customers who cannot afford our inventory." Morgan's smile vanished as his eyes darkened somewhat. "Waste time," he said, his voice falling just enough to land every phrase like a hammer. "Is that what you feel this is?" Travis let out a harsh swallow. Morgan advanced still another stride forward. "Tell me something," he instructed. "If a man walks in here wearing a $10,000 suit but treats people like dirt, do you still roll out the red carpet for him?" Travis hesitated, then gave a tight nod. "Of course," he answered. Morgan lowered his head. "And if another man walks in dressed simply, working hard every day to provide for his family, treating others with respect, do you turn him away?" Travis moved uneasily, his eyes flying about the space. "That's not what I—" "No," Morgan said, his tone cutting and relentless, "because exactly what you did is right here, right now." Between them hovered a heavy hush. Oliver, Daniel's son, too marveled and held his father's hand a little tighter. The reality of the matter battled Travis's pride. His reputation was based on uniqueness and on maintaining a showroom free from objects he judged unworthy. Still, here he was, being taught in front of colleagues, clients, and staff members, as well as among some of the most esteemed men on the planet. His pulse surged and his ears blasted. He thought of doubling down, defending himself, then dismissed it as a misinterpretation. Still, he could tell the truth from the expressions individuals wore. He had lost. Furthermore, not only this case, but also others. He had lost something far more than that, the regard of the very people he had once commanded. Finally, his shoulders fell slightly. His voice softer now, he turned to Daniel. "I apologize." Surprised, Daniel blinked. Oliver, perplexed by the abrupt change, even glanced up at his father. Travis cleared his throat. "I was mistaken to treat you that way, and also in assuming—" Daniel stood somewhat more straight for the first time since going in. He had spent his life battling conflicts seldom seen by others. Then tonight he had at last won one. Morgan nodded toward Daniel and grinned faintly. "That is a start," he remarked, "but an apology counts only if it is accompanied by behavior." Travis hesitated. Then he turned gradually to Sophia, his voice quieter than before. "Get Mr. Carter set up with a test drive," he continued. Sophia's eyes opened, but then she grinned. She responded sharply, immediately reaching for the keys. Of course." Oliver yelled, leaping with great enthusiasm, "Dad, we're going to have a car." Laughing, Daniel ratted his son's hair. "Let's not jinx it just yet, buddy," he remarked, but for the first time in a long time, he really believed things will be good. Morgan gave Travis a pat on the shoulder. "You see, my friend," he remarked, "you gain a hell of a lot when you treat people with respect, but you lose nothing by doing otherwise." And Morgan turned toward the door exactly like that. But he turned back one last time before he departed, his trademark smile flickering at the edge of his mouth. "Oh, and Travis?" also asked. Travis stared up. "Next time, judge a man by his heart, not his wallet." Morgan Freeman then left the showroom, carrying with him a lesson none else would ever remember. Travis Mitchell considered success to be expressed in money, but today he discovered that real success is about the respect you develop rather than about what you sell. And in regard to Daniel Carter, what began as a humiliating event turned out to be the day he showed his kid that, ultimately, decency and endurance always triumph. Still in the center of the showroom, Travis Mitchell watched as Daniel and his son Oliver climbed into the automobile for a test drive. The same man he had written off minutes ago, the man he had thought unworthy of visiting his dealership, was now receiving the dignity he had earned from birth. Moreover, he experienced something foreign settle in his chest for the first time in years. Regrets. Not only for his words to Daniel, but also for the number of people he had treated the same manner prior to this event. His career had been based on exclusivity, on making people feel as though they had to work for their right to be in his presence. But Morgan Freeman had just demonstrated him the error in that kind of thinking. In life, money was not the best currency available. Respect stood for. Travis drew a quiet breath and turned to face Sophia. His voice softer now, he advised, "Make sure he gets the best deal possible." Sophia paused to scrutinize him, then nodded. Morgan watched the transaction, a knowing smile on his lips. He turned one last look back as he moved toward the door. "You see, respect isn't not a privilege reserved for the wealthy," he remarked. It's the one thing in this world that should be given freely, because ultimately the only thing people will remember about you isn't what you owned, but how you made them feel. Travis nodded and started to choke heavily. Still standing next to his son, Daniel caught Morgan's eye and grinned modestly in thanks. There was nothing required in words given tonight. There had been a lesson gained, not only by Travis, but also by you, but by each person working in that showroom. Through this story, we discover that a person's worth isn't determined by the money in their pocket, but by the kindness in their heart. Walking into that showroom, Daniel Carter had been a guy looking for a job to support his son, but he left with something much more, his dignity intact and a lesson his child would carry forward. While Travis Mitchell thought success was determined by riches, tonight he discovered that real success comes from our treatment of people, not from our sales to them. Morgan Freeman did not have to yell. He had no need to debate. He basically reminded everyone in the room of a fact they had overlooked. Respect is a right, it is not a privilege. Judging someone by their appearance just exposes your own flaws. The greatest riches come from your uplifting of others, not from what you own. Ultimately, what really counts is not what you sell, but rather the respect you develop and the lives you transform along the road.